Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 187 of the podcast. In this episode, I talk with Sean Sweet all about Preteen Ministry. Sean leads Preteen Ministry in his church, as well as FourFiveSix, a ministry to help other church leaders minister to preteen. So I really enjoy our conversation. We've had lots of conversations about Preteen Ministry on the podcast, and Sean is one of those people that's been doing it the longest, for sure. Well, this episode of the podcast is brought to you by ServeHQ. Stop using clunky and unsafe communication tools in ministry with a new tool from ServeHQ called Huddle Up. Your email and text announcements can live alongside your team chats in one unified platform that's built just for churches with ease and accountability at the forefront. And you can get more information about that at nickblevins.com/huddleup. And if you're, listening to this when this comes out or some weeks after this episode comes out, we're in a season where communication is different, right? Churches aren't meeting with the coronavirus and things like that, and communication with your volunteers, staying connected with them is really, really important. And the tools they have at ServeHQ with Trained Up and Huddle Up are always great, but now they could be used in some ways more than ever because it's a season where we can work on our ministries, where we can lean into connecting with the people in our church, especially, the volunteers that are on our teams. We can do all that even more. As usual, you can get all the notes and links and things like that from this episode at nickblevins.com/episode 187. Well, let's go ahead and jump into my conversation now with Sean Sweet about Preteen Ministry. Well, today I'm talking with Sean Sweet. Welcome to the podcast, Sean.
Hey, Nick. How you doing?
I'm doing well. As we get rolling here, how about you tell everyone about yourself and your ministry?
All right. So I am in California, in the Sacramento area. I have kind of a dual role right now at the church I'm at. I'm at Destiny Christian Church in Rocklin, which is near Sacramento. And one part of my role is that I'm the preteen pastors for our church. So that's 4th, 5th, and we just added 6th graders 2 years ago to the mix. I've been on staff at Destiny since 2002, and I started as a children's pastor over birth through 5th grade. And in 2008, I gave myself I call it a self-induced demotion, and I became just the preteen pastor at the church. And then, so that's one side of my role. And then another side is that we have a ministry of Destiny that's called FourFiveSix.org, and that's all spelled out, FourFiveSix, FourFiveSix.org. And 456 exists to raise the value of your ministry to preteens. So whoever you are, whether your kids are in a children's ministries context or you have a separate preteen ministry, or maybe your preteens are even in youth, wherever your 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, your 9 to 12-year-olds, wherever they're at, we want to help you take steps forward in ministering to them as a unique age group. So I that was kind of a mouthful, but that's what I do, Nick.
That's awesome. I didn't know 456 was part of or a ministry of Destiny. Like, how does that work? Is it its own separate nonprofit? Is it really just part of the church? I thought that was something you had started separately on your own.
Yeah, so currently it is a ministry of Destiny Church. We started it right after, so the year I became the preteen pastor, 2008, I just started sending out mailers and emails trying to see if we could pull a group of people together who'd want to talk about preteen ministry. And we had a conference in Sacramento. And out of that, there was a group of about 9 of us that started 456. And it was just a volunteer thing where there were different people in full-time roles that were volunteering for it. And then, about 4 years ago, I guess it's been 4 or 5 years ago now, our church said, we want to take this on as a ministry of Destiny. So it's a ministry of Destiny, and my role is split between the two things. And I have a great assistant who runs almost everything on the day-to-day for the local ministry.
And what is that? Tell us more about it. What does it look like? Some people are obviously listening that they're going to be familiar with it, but if they're not, tell us about 456.
Yeah, so 456 is a community. It's a training platform. It's resources. It's anything that can help move people forward in their attempt to be intentional about ministering to this age group. And everything we do, Nick, is around this whole letting go of the bike idea. So the whole idea is that there comes a point when you're teaching somebody to ride a bike where you have to let go of the bike and let them take ownership of it. And we have to let kids start to take ownership of their faith. And 9, 10, 11, 12 is the time when they're ready developmentally, but they have no experience. They're not ready experientially. And so we are figuring out ways of letting go of the bike, but we don't just let go, we run alongside because they're ready developmentally, but not experientially. So it's really kind of a different approach to preteen ministry than the people who say, well, they're too old for kids' church, but not ready for youth. They're really, something different, but we don't know exactly what. We're trying to identify who this group is and what makes them unique and minister to them for what they are instead of just creating like a holding place for them. And so how do we help kids as they're taking their first steps of faith ownership? We know developmentally they're able to do things they couldn't do 3 years ago. So they can start to question authority. They can start to question what they believe. And they can start to really think about, what do I think about Jesus? Who do I say Jesus is? So they're ready developmentally to start taking ownership of their faith, but they have no experience with it. And so that's what we see the role of preteen ministry is helping kids as they're taking their first steps into faith ownership.
Now I want to talk more about preteen ministry and even like what it looks like at your church. You've obviously done it a long time and it's become so much more popular now in the last few years. But I love talking with folks that, have done it for a long time. But before we do that though, tell us a little bit more about 4-5-6 because you have some different things you do with community, training, curriculum. So what are some of those elements?
Okay, so we have a podcast and it's a little different, I think, than some podcasts because it's only 4, 5, or 6 minutes long. And each episode is just, hey, here's one idea. Here's a game idea. Here's a event idea. Here's a service idea. Here's a leadership idea. And so we release those kind of sporadically. And we have like 360 episodes or something now. And our goal is 456. So that's one thing we have. We also have a bunch of resources like a curriculum. It's a 3-year scope and sequence with the whole letting go of the bike idea behind it. We have a summer VBS that we do, like we give you everything you need to put on a summer VBS for kids, for preteens specifically. And then we have other resources too. We do like peer groups where we'll meet in groups of people, 4, 5, or 6 people. Everything's 4, 5, or 6 with us.
Way to carry the brand.
And so we'll meet in small groups to discuss like what's going on with you, and you get to know these other people and they start to feed into each other's ministries. We'll read books together or have trainings together. And so that's our peer groups. We have an online conference, which is not a webinar. It's an actual conference. And it's a 2-day conference with breakout sessions and speakers. And it's all on at an online conference center. So I think it's kind of a different concept. And until you've attended, you can't really put your finger on that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then we also are just, we're available to just answer questions and talk with people. We have a Launchinar, which is a 3-month, like a mentorship program where we're helping people figure out what their next steps are. So we'll do whatever it takes to help everybody out there as they're taking steps forward.
Yeah. And I know on your site, you list other people that are like churches that have preteen ministries and are connected with 4-5-6, and you have these community groups. Is part of that just so that people can find other churches and, talk with people in their area and learn from them, maybe, create a community?
Yeah, I think you're talking about the map. So there's a map at 4-5-6 where you can put yourself on if you have a preteen ministry, but you can also look in your area, and it's a graphic map. So you can see who's around you and click on it and it takes you to their website so you can connect, maybe grab lunch or have a phone call or go visit their ministry space. So a lot of it is networking and helping people to to network with others who are trying to raise the value of ministry to preteens.
Yeah. And you, I see like your peer groups, you'll do them by like experience, like you said, which I think is really helpful, I'm sure, which is a good thing. So you've been doing this now for over 10 years at your church.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, I feel like it's become so much more popular recently. I do want to ask at some point the motivation to add sixth grade and how that's gone.
Okay,
But take me back though, now that you've done it for 12 years or whatever it is, like what are a few things that you've learned or that you pass on, or you think like when, especially again, think about all these churches that have jumped into it now in the last 3 years, like what would you tell those leaders after having done it for 12 years?
Yeah, I think that it's really, it's profound when people start an intentional ministry to preteens. Like it ministers to them just to hear people say, I know you're different. And you don't have to get it right. I'm putting quotes around right, for the preteens to appreciate what you're doing and be ministered to, because they feel different. They know they're different than when they were younger, and they may not know exactly what that means, and you might not know exactly what that means. But just recognizing them as different ministers to them in really amazing ways. That now that these kids are adults, some of the first kids that we ministered to, and they still can think back to when they were in the preteen ministry and how valuable it was for them that somebody saw them and saw that they were something new was happening in their life. And I think one thing I've really been impressed, an impression I've had lately is that it doesn't have to be huge. Like if you just start doing an event once a month that is specifically for your fourth, fifth, or fourth, fifth, sixth, or fifth, sixth, whatever that looks like at your church. If you start there and just start chipping away, it's really amazing, I think, what you can, in 5 years from now, what you can accomplish for those kids. Maybe you start a leadership program and they're serving in the kids' ministry. They're serving with the younger kids. Maybe you start doing a discipleship thing that's only open to the fifth and sixth graders, and you meet with them a half hour before service. There's always a step forward. And if you started a leadership program for your preteens and you think you're done, you're not. Like that's just the tip of the iceberg of what you can do for preteens. And the more you invest in preteens, the return is so great. It's so amazing what preteens can do, and the ways in which they grow and engage is just, I think it's extremely worthwhile for every church, whether you have 2 preteens or 200.
Mm-hmm.
So
now I'd love to hear, I want to talk a little bit more about even like what it looks like, but you added sixth grade, would you say it was 2-3 years ago? And what was the motivation for that? Especially having done it already for a number of years, fourth, fifth. And how's that been? What's that been like?
So our school districts in our area, we have half of them have sixth grade with middle school and half of them have sixth grade with elementary. So way back, even before I started at the church in 2002, sixth grade was with middle school. So that's just the way it's been. It's been 6th, 7th, and 8th has met. And then, we had K through 5 all together, and we split off 4th and 5th. What we continued to see over the years was that sixth graders have a really hard time engaging with the junior high. Even if they're sixth graders in a middle school, they were just having difficulties engaging. It's such a pivotal year in their life, and so much is changing. And we had a bunch of different youth pastors over those years. I think maybe 4, and some were, better at connecting with the sixth graders than others. But it didn't seem to matter. Like sixth graders are they're just blah. There's so much going on with hormones and whatever. So if they're changing schools, why are we also changing the ministry at church? It's like everything in their life is changing So why not have something that's consistent while they get their feet underneath them in middle school? And then for the kids who are still in elementary school, it just makes sense. It made sense. Why are they with the junior hires when sixth grade is, in elementary school for half of our kids? Mm-hmm. So those are some of the motivations. And then it just happened to be the right time. We had a new person coming in to lead our junior high ministry, and we thought, okay, this is the time to make this happen. And senior pastor was like, hey, we have a ministry called 4-5-6, but our sixth graders aren't with you. So it made sense on a bunch of different levels. And what's really cool is that we do a separate program for our sixth graders within our preteen ministry.
Okay, so, tell me about that. What does that look like?
So on Wednesday night, we're all together. We do a service that's 4th, 5th, and 6th all together. On Sunday morning, we start off together, and then our sixth graders break off from the 4th and 5th graders and have their own class. And they talk about some of the things that 4th graders may not be quite ready for, but sixth graders need to start thinking about addressing, dating and sexuality and a lot of the things that sixth graders are, they're dealing with. But 4th graders are still, it's amazing, 2 years, what a difference it makes. And also things like talking to them about what they're learning in school, because they're starting to learn about evolution and world religion and all those things in sixth grade. So we've really seen that sixth grade is a pivotal year. So
you're obviously glad you added it into your ministry.
Oh, and the kids are too. The kids and the parents, we weren't sure what the response would be. It's been 100% positive.
That's great. That's awesome. So tell me, the handoff, you said you've had 4 different youth pastors over that time. How has preteen ministry helped bridge the gap, not just in the age and what they're ready for and the conversations and that kind of context, but like that transition from children's ministry to student ministry, even practically at your church? What has that done and how has that helped?
Yeah. Well, I think the bike analogy is helpful here because junior high or middle school and youth pastors, they tend to want to hop on their bike and ride alongside, right? Like that's kind of youth ministry is like, hey, let's go explore this together, right? And so if you go straight from like a children's ministry where we're showing them the bike and teach them about the bike, but it's not really their bike yet, and we're just saying this is how the bike works, and here's some stories of people who've ridden the bike before you. And if we go straight from that to this youth ministry model where it's like, hey, let's go for a ride, that's where the disconnect happens. Youth minded people, youth ministry minded people, they really are really good at letting go of the bike, but not so much the running alongside. And children's ministries people are that holding on to the bike thing it really comes naturally for them. And so the preteen ministry has helped to kind of bridge that gap between the, teaching about faith to living it out. These preteen years are kind of that stumbling ground so that when they get to youth ministry, they're ready for it. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I guess again, 4 different youth pastors and all that, and you've changed, you added 6th back in, but have they all felt like 4-5-6 and preteen ministry helped support their ministry and that like they were happy to have it there? Or was there ever tension of like, I want the 6th graders in here, or, I guess it didn't matter back when it was 4th, 5th.
Yeah, no, I don't think so because they saw the purpose of it. And I mean, so many youth pastors are kind of, annoyed with the 6th graders. As I talk to people around the country, it's like, gosh, if we could just fast forward through that first year, I don't know. I really think it's helped our children's ministries too. Like it's helped free them up to be more focused on where like 1st and 2nd graders are, instead of going, hey, I have to aim for the 4th and 5th graders and hope, and the other kids will kind of along for the ride. And then I think for our youth pastors, it's done the same thing. Like they can focus now on these 8th graders and 9th graders and they can really focus on where they're at and not have to worry about this weird sixth grade thing. Here's, I think, the big difference, Nick, between preteen and like junior high, is that they're all awkward. The difference is preteens don't know it yet. They don't know they're awkward. Like they don't see themselves as, and go, and kind of, I think junior hires, they start to see that about themselves and they're like, oh gosh, and they don't like it. And it becomes this kind of weird, that weird junior high thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And preteen, they're weird, but they just don't care yet.
That's a better place to be, probably.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
So to have your sixth graders in a place where they can do that, where they can still be weird and not have the eighth graders crossing their arms and going, you're so immature.
Yeah. I wasn't you 2 years ago. Actually,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you were.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I usually ask this kind of question earlier, but tell me what the ministry looks like practically at your church. How many, how often does it meet? How many services? And then even within, when it does meet, what's the typical, Sunday look like?
Okay. So we have, let's see, Wednesday night is easiest because we're all together. It's kind of like a youth night kind of deal. We call it our reveal service, and our focus on Wednesday nights is who is God, just helping preteens to know who God is, to encounter his infinite glory, and then respond to it. Sunday morning is a little different. We have two services. We have a 9 o'clock and an 11 o'clock or something like that. And our 9 o'clock, that's when our sixth graders meet separately and our fourth and fifth graders. And this is more like Christian living. Like Wednesday night is focused on who God is. Sunday morning is focused on, okay, how does that change the way we live? So we'll deal with issues like bullies, or we'll deal with school, or peer pressure, or fear, or whatever. So it's that as opposed to who is God, which is Wednesday night. And then the kids who stay through our 11 o'clock service, that's when we do our discipleship stuff. So if you come to 9 o'clock and you stay through 11, then you enter the discipleship program. If you just come at 11 o'clock, then it's a repeat of the 9 o'clock. And our discipleship program, we have 3 different levels of that going on simultaneously. So we have if you just show up on a Sunday morning and you stay from 9 till 11, then you enter the discipleship program. It's a 30-week program, and you can enter anywhere in the cycle. It doesn't matter. And it's all about like things that Christians do and learning how to do them. So learning how to pray, learning how to worship, learning how to commune with God. So all these kind of things. So it's 30 weeks. And then once they pass that, they can enter our leadership program. And that's another 30 to 40 weeks of the leadership training. That's phase 2. And they're learning how to run the tech booth and how to do check-in and how to lead worship, and like they're actually doing it. And then the third phase is they put together a ministry of their own. So they create their own ministry, and then they do it. So we've had a kid, like a couple examples. We have a sixth grader who started a store to raise money for an orphanage in Mexico, and that was his ministry. Another kid who does a newsletter for all of Elevate. That's his ministry. Some of them join like the preschool department, and that becomes their ministry. So when they move into junior high, they have a ministry that they continue to do. So that's kind of what a broad overview. As far as a service, like a Wednesday night, I think that's probably the easiest to understand. The kids come in, and we do usually an upbeat song, or maybe maybe we'll put on we'll do a dance like the what's the one that everybody's doing these days? Stomp.
Oh, you've asked the wrong person.
The church clap. Church clap.
Oh, okay, yes, I've heard that. Yeah.
But we'll do something like that, something high energy up front, and we just do one. We don't do a bunch of songs in a row. We found that preteens disengage when you do more than one or two songs because they don't have a reason to worship. Some of them, many of them know their reason to worship, but some of them don't. So we'll do that. We'll move into announcements, and some kind of fun game, which will tie into the lesson. And then from there, we do something kind of different with our small groups. Our small groups meet twice in the same service. Instead of having them sit down for 20 minutes and, the sixth grade girls are all about it, but the fourth grade boys are not, we have them meet twice. So we'll have them meet for like 8 to 12 minutes towards the beginning of service and then 8 to 12 minutes at the end of service. And the beginning part, so moving out of like the announcements and games, we'll do a lesson setup. And it's something that anybody can engage with. I don't care if you've been to church your whole life or if this is your first Wednesday night. So it might be something like, we talk about, hey, how many of you have ever felt rejected, And so here's what rejection looks like and feels like. And so I want you to think of a time when you just felt like, oh, man, you felt rejected. And everybody got it, write it down on a card or something. Now take that to your small group and go talk about it. And introduce yourself if you're new tonight. So they'll go to their small groups, they'll talk about that, and they'll come back. So it's really setting them up for the lesson and getting them connected with a small group before the lesson even starts. So then we go into our lesson and we'll teach on, whatever it is, very interactive, lots of kids coming up front and, try to keep things down to maybe 8-minute segments at the most. We never just stand up there and talk. There's always some kind of activity or engagement. It's not entertaining, it's engaging. And then there's worship kind of mixed in there. So when they come back from small group, we'll do worship to kind of set the tone. And then there'll be worship at the end. And then before they go back to small groups at the end, we do something called response stations, where around the room and sometimes even outside the room, we have different ways of responding to the message set up. So if it was a message about, I'm trying to think of something we've done recently. If it was a message about, I'll just do rejection, then there might be a poster board where they go and they write things down on a poster board, ways that they're trying to, they might write truths about who God says they are, as opposed to what what people say they are. Mm-hmm. Or there might be a Lego building thing, or we try to include all different types of kids in the response stations. And then after response stations, we'll worship and go back to small group again. And then we wrap it up. We have everybody come back together and usually sing one more upbeat song together to wrap it up. So there's a lot of movement involved, which is ministering to preteens.
You'll say it's probably strategic, right? You're thinking about short bursts of attention and change it up, and then, yeah. Yeah,
right, yeah. So the curriculum we do, it actually has probably 15 segments per lesson. And they're like gear changes, but that we found is really helpful for preteens. They need to shift gears. It's all one focus. The whole night is one focus, but we're switching gears constantly because they are.
Sure. Now, what is the difference between the attendance of the different Sunday versus Wednesday, all that?
Did you say attendance?
Yeah, not in just numbers, but like who comes to all of them? Do you get different crowds Wednesday versus Sunday?
Yeah, and the reason that we've done it this way, like the reason we organize, okay, who is God? We're going to talk about Wednesday, and then Sunday's more about Christian living, is that the Sunday crowd seems to be more inconsistent. We don't have the same kids, and so we try to create small groups on Sunday, and it just is like 1 week the group has 10, one week the group has 2. And so to do consistent small groups on Sunday just doesn't work for our population. Wednesday is way more consistent. We see way more consistency. It's like if that's part of your routine, then you come on Wednesday nights. And we also see a lot of new kids come on Wednesday nights. It's easier for preteens to invite their friends on Wednesday than a Sunday morning. That's what we found, like, hey, come over to our house for pizza and then we're going to church kind of thing. That's easier than come spend the night, or we'll pick you up on Sunday at 9 a.m. Like, I think it's an easier ask too for people that are leery of church to come on a Wednesday night for their kid to go on Wednesday night than it is for their kid to go on a Sunday morning. Feels more religious and
Sure.
And whatever. So yeah, so we see a lot more consistency, but then a lot more of our new kids come on Wednesday night also. Does that answer?
Yeah. I'd just like to get an idea of like how that, the different crowds, because sometimes, regardless of what the midweek program might be, sometimes you get, it could be quite a different crowd. You could be getting another batch of kids. Some of them could be from other churches. I think of like Awana, right, with kids programs where Sunday's this, and you got Awana, but that picks up kids from other churches. Would you say, you said, Wednesday's the most consistent thing, and you also mentioned some kids stay twice on Sunday morning. Is that because their parents are in some type of class or Sunday school or groups or serve?
It's actually pretty incredible, but we have between 30 and 40 kids who stay for both services. And that's out of like maybe 50 or 60 that attend. So 9 o'clock service will have 50 or 60. 30 of them will stay. And it's just so they can be a part of the discipleship program.
Oh, I got you. Okay. Because they're serving. So, they're being part of the program, and then eventually they're taking on a leadership role. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of the parents, they'll go to one service and then they'll go shopping and then come back and pick up their kids afterwards.
Yeah.
So we have some who will stay and do they'll go to different classes or serve or whatever. But a lot of those parents, like their kids just want to stay for the whole time. So they're letting them stay.
Yeah. Cool. Well, you got a unique program there, and obviously a good ministry with 4-5-6. It's cool that your church has embraced that. I didn't even know that was the case there. Any last thoughts you'd share before we wrap up?
I would just say, Nick, I think there's a step forward for people, and we'd love to help you figure out what that is at 4-5-6. So if you're like scratching your heads about, these kids are different, but you don't know how, and you want to learn more about how they're different, then we can help. If you've been doing it for 10 years, you have a preteen ministry, and you actually want to contribute to the community, 4-5-6 is a hub for that. It's a community. It's not like I'm the leader saying my ideas are the ones that everybody needs to do. So wherever you're at, I think there's a step forward, and 4-5-6 might be a platform where you can find that next step forward. So I guess that's my encouragement is let's take some steps forward together.
Yeah, that's awesome. And how can people connect with you if they have any questions? Obviously, we mentioned 456.org is the website, all spelled out.
Yeah, I'll give you my email address as well. It's ssweet. So it's SSWEET at Destiny Rocklin, ROCKLIN, not Rockland.
Yeah.
DestinyRocklin.com. So cool. ssweet at DestinyRocklin.com. Yeah, and I'd love to just set up a time to chat with anybody and everybody.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, Sean, thanks for coming on the podcast, for the work you do with 4-5-6. I mean, gosh, doing this over a decade now, you're like an originator in some ways. I know Jim Wyman talks about how he's ministered to that group in a unique way back in like the 80s, but it really feels like the bulk of what's happening now is like the last 3-5 years, is where it's really grown, which is cool. I think it's a needed thing, and that's good. But I love talking to folks that have been doing it for a long time. So thanks for coming on the podcast.
You bet, Nick. Thank you for having me.
Well, it was good to talk with Sean all about Preteen Ministry and kind of the origins of 4-5-6. I didn't even know that it was a ministry of their church. That's a really cool thing that their church has embraced that. Which I think is awesome. Here's some action items I think of coming out of that interview. One is to check out 456.org, especially if you're not familiar with that, the different resources they have there and things that might be helpful to you. Another idea in this season that we're in, where churches aren't gathering right now, is to do a Zoom call with preteens. Whether you have a preteen ministry or not, that might be something that you could do to, one, connect and serve and help during this season, but also figure out, is this something that you want to lean into specifically, like a unique, different preteen ministry? Gathering some of the preteens and some leaders for a call could be one way to explore that. Not talking about the idea with them, but just saying, okay, how does that go? What is it like to serve and minister to that group separately? And then third is to create a preteen ministry plan. Whether you have a ministry or whether you don't, your plan, if you don't have one, might be to launch something. If you have one, your plan might be to make it even better. And some things that you might be learning during this season could play a role in how you would make that better. Well, as I said in the beginning, you can get the links and notes and all that at nickblevins.com/episode 187. And check out nickblevins.com/huddle up for those tools from ServeHQ, like Trained Up, Huddle Up, how to communicate with your volunteers through one unified platform, or to provide online training for volunteers through Trained Up, which again, now is probably a good season for that, where people can do some of that online training content on their own and you're not gathering them together. Well, thanks for listening to this episode. I hope it was helpful to you. I hope you're doing well in the midst of this season. If there's anything we can do to help at Ministry Boost, we're doing a number of different calls and webinars, and we've got a free resource that I'll be letting you know about here real soon. If you listen to Carrie Newhoff's podcast, you'll hear about it this week. But let us know how we can help. There's a lot going on. A lot of things are changing. It's a unique time for sure, and we want to be able to help however we can. You can always email me at nick@nickblevins.com or check out ministryboost.org, where we have a lot of that stuff to help leaders during this season. So thanks for listening. I hope you have a great week, and I'll catch you next week on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.